Welcome back to another Titans card review. We got two new Titans today, Warrior and Paladin, and lots to talk about with these cards as always. So let's jump into it with Khaz'goroth. I think this has always been my favorite one of the Titans. Maybe something to do with that red beard, who knows. I like the fact that he's also all about making awesome weapons and stuff too. He is a 6 mana 4/4 Titan. His base ability here is after this uses an ability, gain immune this turn and attack a random enemy minion. So he's going to let you take a little bit of a swing on board. Maybe, you know, if your opponent has an isolated threat there, he could just take a great clean trade and be left behind for them to deal with. And he's got some abilities there that help him support that as well, of course. You got Titan Forge, which will give him +2/+2, and it will draw you a weapon. So giving you a nice little resource. And if you got, you know, something that takes 6 damage, Titan Forge there could be a good way to trade into it. You've also got Tempering. If you need to deal with a bigger threat, this can push you up to 9 attack on Khaz'goroth. It's also going to give your hero 5 attack as well. So basically, you might be able to kill 2 things with Khaz'goroth. You know, if you might have a hard time targeting them perfectly if you need to actually hit one that's like an 8/8 or something, because as soon as you use the ability, he's going to attack. He might actually hit the smaller thing and then leave your attack as a little bit of a risk, maybe hitting the bigger thing. But there will still be plenty of boards where it's like 2 5/5s or whatever, and it's fine, whichever one gets cleaned up. Also noteworthy, though, is the fact that sometimes just hitting face for 5 might feel okay with a card like Khaz'goroth. You know, 6 mana for 5 is not the most efficient damage you've ever had, but finishers like that can still be very relevant. And then finally here we've got Heart of Flame. If you're doing okay on board, you don't need to take a really big trade or anything. This will give you 5 health on your Khaz'goroth, making him even harder to deal with potentially, and then also giving your hero 5 armor. So this also probably makes him a little more decent in some more defensive decks as well. Although certainly I think Titan Forge is fine there too, just drawing you a weapon. So all in all, if this does stick around, obviously that becomes really hard for your opponent to deal with, because you're just going to extract extra trades out of it, get an extra, you know, resource or some extra health or whatever as well. So a little bit snowbally there. And this also plays nicely into various hand buff things that we've seen for Warrior. Clearly Warrior has got some various ways to make their cards bigger, black rock and roll, etc. If you hit Khaz'goroth with any hand buffs, he's going to be even bigger on board taking trades and even crazier for the opponent to deal with. Now, you know, this is definitely one where I feel like you clearly want him to stick around, and his survivability is really important, because I think his abilities feel less valuable and his base text feels the most valuable. Creating this thing that can just keep trading into your opponent's stuff is where I think Khaz'goroth is the most exciting. And that does leave me a little bit worried, because, you know, some decks won't care that you have a Khaz'goroth on board. It's not like this can hit face if there's no enemy minion. The way Titans work, they can't even actually attack for if they have abilities active, right? So in a weird way, like a control priest or something might be like, okay, cool, you've got a Khaz'goroth. It's going to take a few turns for this to even hit me in the face. Like, okay, you got one tempering, but then it's just kind of chilling for a while. So, you know, this doesn't really present as much of like a threat on board as such. Like this ability almost makes him a regular card, that as opposed to something extra, essentially. Like the immune is nice. That obviously that helps keep him around for longer, but in other words, a lot of decks and matchups might not feel that all that threatened by Khaz'goroth. I don't know if he's going to feel that good into so many different matchups. And then even like a wide board based deck, because you've got 3 things on board, Khaz'goroth doesn't really feel that scary necessarily to you either. You're just going to push the other one's face. He's going to clear something up, but may not even be that bad. Or like Divine Shields, for instance. So yeah, they don't really care about Khaz'goroth either. So I don't know, man. I really want to like this because it's like my favorite Titan and so on, but I'm a little bit nervous on how often this returns a meaningful impact on the game. If it could go face, it would probably be too good. Obviously, that's pretty scary, but at the same time, I don't know if it does enough. Could it be a little bit cheaper in that case? I'm left wondering a little bit how many matchups this is actually going to feel best in, because at the end of the day, like getting a temporary 5 attack, getting 5 armor, those aren't like long-term high value kind of payoffs. Like drawing a weapon, yeah, that's okay, but it's a lot of cheap ways to draw things, right? So I don't know, man. There's very specific scenarios where this looks really good, and then I'm imagining a lot of other scenarios where I don't know how much this actually does, because the fact that Titans can't attack, they have to use their abilities instead. So, you know, yeah, okay, you got a 9/4 on board, but it's just sitting there. It's just eating 1/1s or something, right, at the end of the day. So I'm a little sad to say I'm a little underwhelmed by Khaz'goroth. So next up here, we have Amatis the Peacekeeper for Paladin. New Hearthstone lore creation here. She's not normally a Titan, but pretty cool new character to see. She's a 7-mana 1/8. She is a Titan, obviously, and she has Taunt as well. And a base effect here, your minions can't take more than 2 damage at a time. That obviously includes Amatis. Importantly, it is not a for the rest of game effect. I've seen a few people thinking that already since this got revealed. That's only while she is on board, but obviously that makes her much harder to deal with on board, particularly for any decks that might want to rely on damage to remove her, whether that's spells in hand or minions trying to trade in on board. Kind of takes 4 hits here to actually push your way through the Amatis, which is going to be really tough for some decks to do unless they're super far ahead on board. So could present a really nice defensive wall. I like to think of it particularly in combination with like 2 light rays or something. You slam it all down at once and it's like, oh my god, all of these are so hard to deal with. Other decks might have non-damage based removal that more swiftly pushes through that. Any kind of universal removal, the Twisting Nethers of the world and such won't have a problem, but some decks definitely will feel completely shut down by this effect. We've also got some supporting abilities here, obviously, like Empowered over there on the right, that will give your other minions +2/+2. Imagine that with the light rays, an even more hellishly defensive wall of taunts in the way. That could be very, very hard to deal with. That could also be a finisher of sorts if you've managed to build a board. This can be a way to give you like lethal damage. It's kind of an expensive Savage Roar in that world. But alongside Amatis might also just be really hard for the opponent to deal with that. Maybe over a couple turns, you kind of whittle them down with these just impossible to kill minions. And that's what wins you the game. And in kind of a board-based back and forth battle, that would obviously be a huge advantage, being able to trade stuff in without it taking a ton of damage and then leaving it behind to be that lethal threat persisting into a future turn. You've also got Reinforce here, which is a pretty cool ability. Draw 2 minions, set their attack, health, and cost to 2. Notably there, the cost being set to 2 could create some degenerate opportunities with some card that normally costs way more. That might be hard to pull off reliably in the kind of Paladin decks we see today, which are a little bit more straightforward. Pure Paladins not running a ton of big, cheesy, crazy things, but if it did occasionally hit the Countess, could be a huge upside, right, to get a big play. Alternatively, though, you could actually maybe play this in combo decks or something down the road. I don't know if anything like that exists today, but imagine in the olden days, you know, discounting a Malygos to 2. Not a tool Paladin historically would have a ton of options for, but you can kind of get your gears turning on how discounting certain things that notably could be an enormous advantage. And the fact that it draws 2 minions specifically means you might even be able to limit your deck enough that you're always hitting the card that you want. So do keep that in the back of your mind as a possibility. And then finally here we have Pacified, which will set enemy minions to 2/2 for stats, which makes them clearable for consecrations and things, but ultimately, I don't know, it doesn't feel like it's that good of a tool to me. Usually if you're getting the Amatis down, hopefully that's what's creating the defensive utility. I don't know how often you're going to be that excited by Pacified. Maybe a deck that specifically has a lot of stuff on board that's big and also has removal for Amatis. This could be a sweet spot, but that seems like the least impactful and least likely to be good to me. Remember, it's not sort of a Sunkeeper Tarum effect because you're not buffing your own stuff to match necessarily. That could always be a great swing because you'd bring your Silverhand Recruits up to 3/3 and push your opponent's Giants down to 3/3, equalizing. But in this case, it's going to be harder to pull that off, not to mention this is just more expensive. So all in all, listen, I do think Amatis has some useful high utility effects here, but I do think they're kind of clunky in some cases. Like sometimes Empowered, you're just not going to have the board and it feels weird to play Amatis. And in those cases, is Pacified actually all that useful? Your opponent still gets to trade through the Amatis with the 2 attack, the same as they would if they were 8/8s anyway. So this can set you up for like a board clear on a future turn. It's, again, not bad or anything. It just doesn't feel like that swingy or that impactful. Reinforce does feel reliable, like that's always going to work, but how often are you going to have time to do that? Paladin, as it's played right now at least, has a lot of other reload tools that are really good. I don't know that Amatis necessarily outpaces those unless you're hitting those really significant discounts, but the deck's running lower cost minions. So I don't know, right now Amatis feels like a weird fit to me in pure Paladin. It might still make it. This deck can run a few high-end cards, top end there, but is it better than the Countess? Is it actually even better than the Leviathan? That might just be kind of a more immediate board-based play. In some cases, maybe. Just depends on the shape of the meta. So, you know, it's one of those cards that looks solid to me. I wouldn't be surprised at all if it makes its way into a deck. These Titans are just, you know, they're legendaries. It's a one-of. It's not hard to squeeze it in. So, not to me, though, as crazy powerful and impactful as some of the other Titans we've seen. Definitely feels a little more limited, a little more reserved, a little less consistent in a lot of ways. So, intriguing, just not crazy. Pains me to say, but I fear Khaz'goroth might be a 2-star card. Amethyst the Peacekeeper is a 3-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for this review. As always, share your thoughts on these cards down in the comments below. Do you guys like Khaz'goroth a little bit more than me? It's just, man, I don't know. There's so many little boards this is going to whiff on. I'm super nervous about it. I was hoping this would be awesome. Hope I'm wrong. Let's hope so. I've never been wrong before, but this is... This is one time, the first time ever. I'd love to be wrong. All right, share your thoughts down below. Definitely don't make fun of me for that. And thanks for watching as always. And until next time, game on.